Welcome back. Quarterly crime statistics have shown that 39 children were killed in the Western Cape so far this year, 20 more than in the same period last year. Just last week, a 9-year-old boy in Manenberg was shot dead while playing outside his home. Let's discuss this further with the Western Cape Community Safety MEC Reagen Allen. A very good evening to you, MEC. Grateful for your time. So, 39 children murdered in your province from January. That is 20 more than the same period last year. It suggests that you've got a crisis on your hands.
Tembekile, thank you so much for the opportunity in bringing us into this very difficult conversation. It's a conversation where we are wanting to take residents and communities into our confidence as well. I have noted, based on that parliamentary reply, you are correct that 39 children have been murdered in our province between January to date. However, there is 20 less when we compare it to the previous year financial quarter. But either way, it is 39 too many. It is one too many, because we would never want any of our children to be murdered. And Tembekile, just the one that happened on last week, Saturday. It was a known gangster, a criminal, that was busy cleaning his gun inside a residential property, and the gun went off, hitting the boy in the head. He succumbed to his injuries 5 days later, and it's very traumatic for that particular family, for that community. But I am happy to announce that that particular person is in custody. Bail has been announced, and we are anticipating that once it gets to sentencing stage, that particular person will receive what is due to them for perpetrating this hideous crime against a young child who had his entire life in front of him.
And to be clear, MEC, I think we're all a bit confused here. Are you saying, because it was reported that basically that in the corresponding period in 2022, 19 children were killed, you are saying now that this year's figure, 39, is lower? What was the figure for last year?
Now, thank you so much for us allowing to clarify it as well. The parliamentary reply clearly indicate that we have seen now where it is 39. However, when we compare to the previous quarter, it was 59. So it's actually 20 less and not actually more. But either way, Tembekile, it is too many, because like I've said, we would never want any of our children to be murdered, and many of the motives and the reasoning behind those killings is when there's gang flare-ups, which leads to sporadic shootings in certain communities, which ultimately leads to a stray bullet catching a young child, often playing, often being even in their own yard. But it's 39 too many.
And I want to ask one more clarity-seeking question on that, and then we can move on to where these murders are happening. You said the previous quarter was 59, and I'm right to say that the previous quarter and the corresponding period last year aren't necessarily the same thing. So the corresponding quarter, am I right to say, would be the same period last year versus the last quarter, which would have been the quarter before this reporting period?
Tembekile, in terms of our analysis and how the stats are derived, it is usually quarter by quarter for the very same period in order to get a more accurate reflection of circumstances in a community. So if it is between January and March, or between March and the end of July, it will be for the very same period that we are analyzing for the previous financial year as well, to get a more accurate picture of what has been happening. So not necessarily quarter on quarter, but we have seen in the last quarter, and it was all over the media as well, is that we have seen a 14.1% reduction in the murder rate overall, which was actually the highest decrease across our entire country. But we still can't rest, knowing that there's still too many people being murdered as a result of it is either interpersonal violence, gang-related murders, or retaliation and mob justice, and we want to eradicate all of those categories that lead to murder in our province.
And are these children all being killed in areas where there is a gang problem?
Predominantly, yes. And
MEC Reagen Allen, are you still with us? Let's see if we can reconnect the Western Cape Community Safety MEC Reagen Allen speaking to us, because some concerning data out of the Western Cape in a parliamentary reply has revealed that about 39 children have been killed in that province since the beginning of this year. You can imagine that amounts, by my calculation, to about 6 every month if you look at it over the months so far this year. I think we've got MEC Reagen Allen back with us. MEC, I was just asking you a short time ago if all of these children who have been killed in the Western Cape were killed in areas where there is a known gangsterism problem.
Temikile, thank you so much for hanging on. It is very clear that there's over 80%. It's in our priority areas. Our priority areas make up for 13 of our stations in our province. To sketch a vivid picture, Temikile, is that we have 151 police precincts. 13 of those stations contribute to over 44% of our murders. 13 out of 151 contribute to over 44% of our murders. We have seen when it's gang-related murder and interpersonal violence, there's retaliations and revenge killings, it's in those areas. And in those areas we often have where we have complementary services like our leap officers, like our neighborhood watchers, which is all over, but also in our priority areas, in our so-called hotspot areas. And it is the areas of Delft, there's the area of Mitchell's Plain, Harare, Licha, all the murder hotspot areas, and that is where we ultimately put our attention, because the data is showing us that we are needing to curb gang violence. We are needing to ensure that all other departments that have a role to play towards safety, like social development, cultural affairs and sport, even education, to make sure that our young people stay in school for longer so that they can have better prospects. But it is predominantly in those hotspot areas or priority areas, Temikile.
So the bottom line is that until you've rid the Western Cape of all the gangsters, the drug lords, innocent children will continue to die.
I feel very agitated about the fact that we haven't seen enough of gang-related murders actually leading to sentencing. Temikile, last week, and I think you might be aware as well, in that there was a landmark conviction where a guy that literally grew up in the area where I grew up, and he's a known gangster in Mitchell's Plain, and after a 5-year period, he was finally convicted. Sentencing is happening tomorrow, and this is a known drug lord, a gangster that have contributed to so much havoc in our communities.
But it's happening much too slow, sir, because it's happening much too slow, because in the Western Cape, I remember watching documentaries as a teenager where there were reports of communities where on days when there were serious flare-ups in gang violence, parents had to decide whether they were going to allow their kids or not. You've had incidents where we've covered schools in the Western Cape where people say communities are so gang-infested that children as young as 7 and 8 now know what to do when they hear shots ring out and they're in a classroom.
And typically that is my anger, that is my frustration, that it is on record 5 years it took for the justice system to actually work to bring that criminal to justice, to ensure that he is actually convicted, and by tomorrow he will be sentenced. It took 5 years in terms of the Prevention of Organized Criminal Activities Act to bring that perpetrator and bring that criminal to justice. We have been very clear. We are wanting to see the justice system actually work. It shouldn't be the long arm of justice, that we must actually see that once the evidence is there, our detective services are ramped up so that we can see a higher conviction rate as well. And that is part of the reason why we've been calling for SAPS to be under a provincial government closer to the people, so that we can get some of the management matters right here in our province. Currently, there is certain processes that flows all the way from Pretoria that is affecting us here in our province. But we are making strides. We are stepping up, going beyond our mandate. But I feel that same frustration that you are feeling, because it takes too long. We are wanting to see these criminals behind bars.
And what guarantee is there that if the services or powers of the SAPS were transferred to the provincial government, that there would actually be a difference? Because police inefficiencies are a nationwide problem at the very basic and most community level, in fact.
It is often been stated, and it's often been confirmed via the AG, via every independent metric, that where the Western Cape government is governing, we're actually governing better. And that's not just from a party political side saying it. That is even the AG, that is independent reports saying every metric there's better governance. I firmly believe that there's certain governance, there's government matters that we would be able to bring in as quickly as possible with that executive authority, because even now, Temikili, we are wanting to see our oversight is leading to better service delivery. Otherwise, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I in this particular role if I'm unable to show that the oversight leads to better service delivery? Now we have been calling since 2019 to have those powers and not for choices to be made all the way in Pretoria on deployment, on where certain SAPS officers must go. We would want to use the systems that we have here in place, our data, the evidence that we have already confirmed with the South African Police Service, and we have a solid working relationships with entities, with partners in the safety space here in our province. Right. That's why we're saying, give us the opportunity and we will take the responsibility, because we are wanting to actually serve and show the residents of the Western Cape that we will be able to take that mandate.
And in the cases then lastly of the murders of children in the Western Cape, especially in communities where we know there's active gang warfare, are there instances where minors are targeted, where it's not an accident, where a gun goes off by accident, or a child happens to be in the vicinity of where gangsters are engaged in an exchange of fire? Are there cases where the people who kill children intend to kill a minor?
Tembekile, thank you so much for asking that question. That was one of my key questions to our analyst here in the department as well. Currently, the evidence suggests that that is not the case, that there's no targeted killings against children. The evidence also suggests that there's no targeted killings just against innocent people. There's no gunman running around in our province that is just shooting people aimlessly and for no particular reason. There's gang violence as a motive. There is retaliations as a motive. There's also revenge killings as a motive, and there's also interpersonal violence as a motive. But it's not aimlessly where people are running around and targeting children. As such, we are seeing that we are consistently analyzing that to ensure that that is not the case. And I can confidently say it's not the case, but it's something that I closely monitor. And it's a question that I have directly asked to our own analysts here in the department to verify and to give me solid information based on the narrative here in the province. But we will continue, Tembekile, to do everything in our power to help and assist our communities.
Western Cape Community Safety MEC Reagen Allen, good to speak to you, sir. Thank you so much for your time tonight.